We turn our attention now to Europe. Joining me here in the studio is the Ukrainian Ambassador to Australia, Vasyl Myroshnychenko. Ambassador, thank you for your time. The Prime Minister, Mr Albanese, is attending NATO next week in Madrid. No doubt the Ukraine conflict will be high on the agenda, and possibly a visit to Ukraine after that by the Prime Minister. Would you welcome that if he's able to get there?
Indeed, the NATO summit next week is a very important summit because this summit is not only hosting the NATO member states, but it's also hosting plus 10 allies of NATO. And the representation at the level of the Prime Minister of Australia, Prime Minister of New Zealand, Prime Minister of Japan, and President of Korea, this is of a very high level, and it's unprecedented in its scale. And of course, if Prime Minister Albanese can come to Ukraine, my President Zelensky, would really welcome it. He would be delighted to host him in Kiev, especially given all the support that Australian government has provided to Ukraine so far.
Australia is apparently the largest non-NATO contributor and supporter of Ukraine. Has that resonated with the Ukrainian people?
Absolutely. Australia is so popular now. When you get a taxi in Kiev or anywhere else and you say you're from Australia, the next thing you hear is Bushmaster. Bushmaster has become kind of a brand name, which is an armored personnel vehicle, which was granted to Ukraine. Australia has provided 40 of those vehicles. 20 were already delivered. But it's been in the news so much in Ukraine. So now that when you hear Australia, apart from thinking about kangaroos, people think about the Bushmasters.
And would you like to see more military support, ammunition and so on from Australia?
Absolutely. We would like to see more armored personnel vehicles. We would like to see more 1x5 of artillery pieces. We would like to see more anti-tank missiles, and which could be provided to Ukraine, and would be very thankful for that little aid to continue coming, because this war is existential from Ukraine, and the weapons which Russians are using against us are extremely powerful. They're using supersonic bombs, they're using cluster bombs, they're using lots of actual weapons which are banned by international conventions. So these ballistic missiles which are being shot in Ukraine, and Russia has already shot over 3,000 of those ballistic missiles. We don't even have those in Ukraine, but to protect us, to liberate the Ukrainian people which are currently under the Russian occupation, we need a steady pipeline of weapons coming into the country to be able to defend ourselves and to be able to restore the sovereignty of Ukraine.
What's the morale like among your people?
Look, morale is still high, and especially now that we understand that that's an existential threat for us, because if Russia stops fighting, it's the end of the war. If Ukraine stops fighting, it's the end of Ukraine. So for us, it's an existential struggle, and we understand that we are in it for the end. We are there, but that's a fight of a David and a Goliath. And I'm really pleased that the free world and democratic countries are standing strong with Ukraine. And I think Australia has this tradition of resistant coercion. And by investing, making this vital investment into Ukraine, Australians are true to their tradition of giving it a fair go. And I think that's so important. And also, it's not only your moral support, but it's also the material support is out there. But look, Ukrainians are united as never before.
The European Union is meeting to vote on whether to recognise Ukraine as a candidate for membership. It's not full membership, it's a candidacy. Is that a significant step if it is successful?
That would be tremendous because, you see, being recognised as a candidate member opens up the doors to the negotiations about accession. It may still be a long road to go, but actually starting these negotiations officially will speed up the reforms within the country. It would unlock the funding which would come from the EU, at least at this initial stage. Of course, most of the funds will be accessible to Ukraine only after we join the EU, but that would send an extremely strong signal that Ukraine is part of the European family. Ukraine is welcomed by the European Union. I had to remind you, 9 years ago, when President Yanukovych refused to sign an EU-Ukraine Association Agreement in Vilnius in November 2013. That was only a trade agreement with the EU. We had the revolution of dignity in Ukraine. Millions of people stormed the streets. Over 120 got then executed and killed in a day broad light in the central square in Kiev. This is where actually my offices are, and just next door to the current embassy of Australia in Ukraine. And people were just shot dead in their heads. 120 people. Can you imagine that? And then Russians invaded. And Russians invaded us because they want us to be kept out of the EU. They don't want us, they just believe they need to revive the Soviet Union, revive the Russian Empire. And that was the main reason why Russians were so objecting to Ukraine's potential entry into the NATO, because if we become part of NATO, Russians can never invade us. And they always wanted to invade, and now they've done it.